Brandon, have you been occupying yourself with any movies or TV in the days between games?
I did go see the new Star Wars movie, the Mandalorian and Grogu movie.
And what is your review?
We give a thumbs up. It's obviously not like classic Star Wars movies, but I would say of all the recent Star Wars movies that have come out, it's one of the better ones. It's cool because it's kind of like its own thing. You don't have to watch the Mandalorian show. I've only seen season one, but you don't have to watch the show to watch the movie. And the big takeaway is that Grogu is adorable.
That was my follow-up question. Is the reason to see the movie because Grogu is adorable? Sounds like the answer is yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
100%. They had to spend so much money on like all these big action fight scenes and CGI and set pieces and all those stuff. They could have honestly just had 2 hours of Grogu on screen just doing cute things, and I would have been happy.
Yeah, well, my wife and my youngest went to go see the movie, and they hadn't seen any of The Mandalorian, but they came back, and we've been watching The Mandalorian show on Disney Plus. And my takeaway from the show is that Grogu is a scene stealer every single time.
Yeah, you honestly just kind of wait for Grogu to show up and do something awesome. And what's even better is when like he uses like his, I guess it's force powers. Whenever he uses that stuff, because he's so little bitty, but then he can like lift up these like huge, heavy objects or people or things. Fill in the noun. So it's pretty cool and fun to watch.
Welcome back to the Daily Thunder podcast. I'm John Napier, publisher of Daily Thunder, and I'll be your host today. Alongside me is Daily Thunder beat writer Brandon Rahbar. Brandon, how are you on this 3-2 series lead day?
I gotta tell you, feeling pretty good about the Thunder on this 3-2 series day, because that was an against all odds win last night. I honestly do not think it has been talked about enough. I'm just jumping the gun. I'm like going into analysis. All you did was ask me how I'm doing. I'm doing good, John.
Yeah, we're going to have plenty of time for analysis, but right now we're going to start off with some good vibes because it does feel good to have a 3-2 series lead, to be one win away from a second straight finals trip, and the dream of back-to-back championships remains alive. However, before we get into Game 5, I want to go back a step, and maybe we're going to start off with a little bit more of a somber mood, and that's going to talk about Game 4, because we haven't had a Daily Thunder podcast to discuss Game 4, so it's only fair to the listeners that we look back at that Spurs demolishment of the Thunder in San Antonio, 103-82 win. So let's start there. Brandon, big picture, what went wrong in that game?
Honestly, and I think that this is a testament to when we talk about Game 5, I think the biggest thing was not having J-Dub or AJ Mitchell, not having another ball handler, creator, playmaker on the court, and the Spurs, kind of disguising their doubles and traps on Shea instead of doing it at half court. They were basically disguising it until he got past the 3-point line. Then they would throw doubles or Shea towards this area. And that was one look that the Thunder hadn't seen against the Spurs yet. And honestly, they still created a bunch of good looks, and they just did not hit them. Obviously, the Thunder lose by 21. Terrible game for OKC. Just absolutely, about the worst you can imagine. All that said, the defense was still really good. The Spurs only scored 103 points, and that includes a half quarter at the halftime buzzer from Wemby. It was just the offense couldn't get unlocked whatsoever. A lot of that was, their defense. A lot of that was the Thunder did not hit the open looks that they did get. And a lot of the role players that we saw dominate in every other game in this series, Alex Caruso, Jared McCain, Jay Will, Kasem Wallace, they couldn't get going at all collectively. None of them could. So it was just kind of the perfect storm of everything that could go wrong, did go wrong in Game 4 offensively. So, yeah, I think that starts, though, with no J-Dub and no AJ Mitchell. It puts so much pressure on Shea to kind of be perfect, and the role players to hit their open shots, and that didn't happen in game 4.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the shooting stats for the Spurs, they shot just 39% from the field, 27% from three. So it's not like they were having a great offensive game. I think one of the things that they did really well in game 4, which they had struggled with in games 1 through 3, was protecting the ball. They only had 13 total turnovers and only gave up 13 points off of turnovers. But it was the Thunder who were turning the ball over. And I think it was the issue of not having that secondary ball handler creator. And the Thunder were just turning the ball over so many times. 20 total turnovers, 25 points conceded off of turnovers. Spurs had 18 fast break points, which is 7 for the Thunder. And then when you couple that where the Thunder couldn't make a shot to save their life, it was just everything kind of went wrong for OKC in that.
Yeah, it really did. It really was just everything that could go wrong went wrong. And that's why I was so impressed, not to jump ahead to the good stuff. That's why I was so impressed by the game 5 bounce back, because it seemed like, and if you went by vibes, if you went by narratives, if you went by any online talking head, broadcast talking head, podcast, anywhere that you listen or watch NBA basketball analysis, that the Spurs had, seized all momentum. The Thunder were still going to be without J-Dub and AJ Mitchell for game 5. There's pieces out there saying that the Spurs just completely solved the Thunder and sent them into a spiral. It just felt like the entire discourse was the Spurs are going to win this. The Thunder are not going to win a game 5 after that game 4 blowout, and it's Spurs in 6. That's just the way it felt if you listen and watch anything. And that, to me, is why I'm so impressed by the game 5 bounce back.
Yeah, and it really felt that way after you see the way that Victor Wembanyama played. He had 33 points. He shot 11 of 22 from the field. He only had 8 rebounds in that one, 3 offensive rebounds, but he was a plus 29 in the game compared to SGA, who was a minus 18 in the game. Like, the Thunder just could not execute, and the Spurs sort of did exactly what they needed to do in a rout. And yeah, I think the takeaway from that game is the Thunder may be able to continue to play solid defense overall, but the gap now between the Spurs and the Thunder, when the Thunder don't have AJ, when they don't have Dub, tilts in favor of the Spurs, because the Thunder can't score. They can't rely on SGA to create, 110 points of offense on his own. And without that, the Thunder aren't going to be able to put up enough points to compete with the Spurs in the next few games.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like. Because without AJ Mitchell and J-Dub, not having those two guys, those are probably the Thunder's second and third best offensive players outside of Shea. And you go against a team that has an 8-footer in the paint, and you have the best player on the planet who likes to score in the paint and at the rim and in the mid-range. And, Wemby is just occupying that space, and he doesn't have the help of another ball handler or creator to help him out. It just feels like, man, do the Thunder have enough offense to keep up with the Spurs with those two guys out? And if it was just one of them out, if J-Dub was in and AJ was out, or vice versa, you'd feel like, okay, at least when Shea sits, there's another ball handler. And when they can play together, at least there's somebody to help out Shea when he's getting trapped or doubled to help create some offense. And so that's why I think that, scoring 127 points in a game 5 is just so impressive to do that without J-Dub or AJ Mitchell. J-Dub is an all-NBA player, all defense, all-star. AJ Mitchell is the guy who, everybody in the media after Series 1 and Series 2, these playoffs said could be a future all-star and probably win 6th Man of the Year if he stayed healthy this year. Those two guys are out, and the Thunder did that against the Spurs defense. So impressive.
Well, you keep wanting to skip ahead to game 5.
I know.
I'm going to hold you back. It's just one more topic on game 4, because we really do have to set the stage. The game 4 disappointment, I think, really is the appetizer to game 5, and that's why you keep jumping to game 5. So I get it, totally get it. But when the Thunder were searching for offense and for a spark, I think Mark tried a bunch of different players. Jared McCain played 24 minutes. He did get heavy rotational minutes. He didn't start in this one in game 4, but his shooting was off. He was 1 of 10 from the field, 0 of 5 from 3 with just 4 points. Aaron Wiggins got the most run of, any game in this series, in part because of the blowout, but in part because I think there was a search for a spark. Wiggins, 2 of 11 from the floor, 0 of 4 from 3, just 4 points. Alex Caruso had maybe been the Thunder's most consistent player this entire playoffs, was 0 of 1 from the field, didn't take any other shots, put up a goose egg in points, and was basically a non-factor in this one. J. Will, who had a great game 3, was 1 of 7 from 3, couldn't make anything. Chet, I think he played. I mean, but, you look at all these different pieces and the spark that was missing, the depth that was so critical to the game 3 win just wasn't there in game 4. What do you think that with the bench the way that it is, that there's just going to be that variance, and some nights they're going to be on and some nights they're not going to be on?
Yeah, I'm like a kid trying to skip past the vegetables and get straight to dessert. My bad. Uh, I do think because it's one of those NBA cliches that role players don't play as well on the road as they do at home, but it's a cliche for a reason because it really is true. And when you're dealing with role players, or really any NBA player, you're going to get some variance. You're going to get shooting variance. And we saw that in game 4. I just think that the Spurs were desperate in game 4. The Spurs played hard game 4. They played very physically game 4. We haven't even got to the whole Stephon Castle defending Shea of it all and how physical he was and how, the officials for that particular game did not, call many calls there. And the Spurs ended up with a plus 14 free throw advantage. I'm not saying that's why they won. It's not why they won. They played better in game 4, period. But I think when you take all these elements together, the role players not hitting on the road in a game the Spurs were desperate and got the benefit of the free throws and the Thunder couldn't hit their open shots. It's 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 equals blowout. I mean, is what it basically ended up being.
Well, now let's go to game 5, which is what we've already talked about quite a bit, thanks to you. But headed after game 4, well, the fans ride a roller coaster of emotions. So, after game 3, it was like the Thunder had asserted their dominance and the Spurs weren't ready. I think that was the general discourse. After game 4, in the way that Wemby led the Spurs to a dominant win, there was that big shift. The Thunder are too banged up. Missing AJ and Dub is too much to overcome. It seems like this is going to be the Spurs' year. And, heading into that game, the line was, between 3.5 and 4.5 in favor of the Thunder. So the Thunder were favorites. But all of the betting action, like 70+% of the betting action, was on the Spurs to cover, because I think the expectation was that the Spurs would win. I think the Spurs even got like 60 or 70% of the betting action on the money line. And I know that Daily Thunder is not a supporter of gambling, but it's a good insight into the sentiment of the people who watch these games to make money. They thought the Spurs were going to win this game, and they didn't. And then Thunder controlled the game pretty much from start to finish. They got off to one of the better starts that they had. They weren't way behind from the very beginning and just controlled the game all the way into the fourth quarter. So you've talked about the response, which was really, really impressive. What do you think about the decision to start Jared McCain in this one?
Brilliant. Honestly, I loved it. When I saw the starters were announced, I said, I was with Daniel Bell, and I said, that's a perfect call. They needed more offense. They needed more spacing. They needed more shooting, somebody to space the floor for Shea, to give him an outlet, and they needed another ball handler. And I would say with J-Dub and A.J. Mitchell out, Jared McCain was the next best ball handler, and we saw that in game 3. So I thought it was the right move. Obviously, it paid off. Now, in the first half, McCain didn't play like I think most fans expected him to play. He kind of struggled. He had a few turnovers early. He wasn't, really hitting any shots. But that second half, and again, he started the second half, he came out and he was on an absolute heater. He hit an and one shot that was like reminiscent of the Russell Westbrook flip shot in the playoffs so many years ago, just like an impossible and one. He hit 3 threes in that second half, a couple that were absolutely huge in the fourth quarter. And especially at home, the Thunder crowd absolutely, it was like love at first sight with Jared McCain. And so every single time he hits the three, the pop in that arena, the energy, the atmosphere like goes through the roof, and the team feeds off of that. So it's like the snowball effect. If Jared McCain starts hitting shots, obviously that's going to help your team out, but it also helps the energy and all those things. I thought it was the right call. And by the way, when he was introduced pregame as a starter, huge ovation, like over the top in a great way ovation for a guy that's been on the team for 3 months. The crowd absolutely loves Jared McCain.
Yeah, I noticed that in the pregame introductions. It almost seemed like McCain got the second biggest ovation, and his ovation was pretty close to the ovation that SGA got as the MVP. So pretty impressive that he's already endeared himself to the fans to this level.
Yeah, he is instant fan favorite. Like, it's wild. He's been on this team for such little time. I think the initial trade was exciting because one, I don't think Thunder fans were expecting OKC to make an actual like needle moving move at the trade deadline. So there was inherent excitement, but then added on to that, it was a shooter, which OKC fans have been clamoring for, a while. And he was like a true shooter. Plus, this was a guy who was like exciting to watch. He was like the rookie of the year runaway favorite before he got hurt last year with the 76ers. So there was like already some hype on him. And then the whole TikTok, YouTube thing, he's like a social media star. And then he's so fun and likable and happy. So he's easy to cheer for. And then he comes in and he makes an instant impact on winning. And he's doing that in these playoffs. Like the fact that he's starting in the Western Conference Finals for the defending champs after being in the G League just a few months ago with the 76ers as he was coming back from injury is just absolutely nuts. But yeah, the Thunder fans embraced him from the jump, and that love has only grown. Like he's getting to like J Will levels of affection, it seems like. I don't want to say he's there yet because J Will is like a special case, but he's approaching that already, I would say.
Yeah, and I was glad you mentioned the G League thing. That's been brought up a lot, I think, recently on social media because it's like, how did the Sixers be so willing to part ways with this guy? How did they not see what they had? They thought he wasn't good enough to play in the NBA. They had him playing in the G League, but here he is starting Game 5 in a 2-2 series in the Western Conference Finals. And on top of that, not just starting, but he played 33 minutes and scored 20 points in this one. But one thing I want to raise about McCain, which I think is so important to the Thunder without Dub and AJ, is outside of Shea, he's the one guy who is a threat to score at all three levels, right? He can shoot from three. He can create that mid-range, that little free throw line fadeaway that he, I think, consistently hits. He makes really smart plays at the rim. He's not really an attacker like Dub, but he's more savvy like AJ. And that threat is absolutely critical to either spell SGA or to create something on offense when the Spurs have designed their whole defense to stop Shea. But not only that, what McCain does really well is, I said this in the recap, he plays fearlessly. And he's got just enough of the irrational confidence that the Spurs don't know what to do with him. They have to defend him. There's not somebody they can just ignore in the corner. He's a threat to create shots for himself and for teammates, and he may take a bad shot. He may think that he's going to, make a shot and there's a better pass available, but that confidence, that threat to be a shooter and a scorer is making the Spurs think twice about how they defend him.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. It's like he's Dion Waiters with the confidence, but he can actually hit shots. Yeah, you know what? That's not fair to Dion to be catching strays when the Thunder are up 3-2 in the Western Conference Finals and one win away from the NBA Finals. But, he's like the Thunder player I think of, former Thunder player I think of when I think of like that confidence. Like every time he gets it, it's going to go up. But Jared McCain, you feel like he's going to hit those shots. And I think that it helps bend the defense. The defense has to be aware of Jared McCain, and he is constantly relocating. Like, he reminds you of Steph Curry. I just compared him to both Dion Waiters and Steph Curry in a matter of like 10 seconds. I both apologize, and you're welcome, Jared, for that. His relocation, though, is nuts. He is constantly moving, and so you've constantly got the defense either moving or they lose sight of him and he's open, but you have to be aware of him. So I just love the way he moves. I love the confidence he has. Like, Chet was asked about Jared McCain in the post game last night, and the first thing he says, like, how many shots did he get tonight? And he was told it was 19. He said 19 shots, attaboy. Like, the Thunder guys want Jared McCain to put those shots up. Like, his role when he comes out there is to shoot. Like, there's zero hesitation. It doesn't matter where he is. It doesn't matter if there's a hand in his face. It doesn't matter if he's 5 feet behind the line. It doesn't matter if it's early in the shot clock and maybe sometimes it's not, quote unquote, the best shot because you want to maybe chew some clock late in the game when you've got a lead. But, he also hit some of those as well. So he is so much fun to watch because of that quick trigger and his ability, like his unlimited range to hit shots.
And I think a subtle thing about his play is that I think there was an expectation he was going to be a major defensive liability. And no one is going to equate him to Lou Dort or Cason Wallace. But I've actually been impressed by his basketball IQ and his defensive IQ. And there is an article on The Ringer about what the Thunder have been doing and how they've been able to stop Wemby by loading up the paint. There's a clip that is in the article where it shows Wemby driving and Cason Wallace coming over to help and leaving Dylan Harper. But Dylan Harper is starting to shade toward the paint. And you see in this clip, Jared McCain move to cut off both Harper from being able to make that cut to the basket and have an outlet for Wemby, but also just enough space to stay glued to his man so he could rally in the corner if he needed to. And to me, like, those are the things you need Jared McCain to do, not just to not make mistakes on defense, to have the right basketball IQ, to know where he's supposed to be helping off the ball, not be a ball watcher. And plays like that really have been as impressive as the way he's played offensively to me.
Yeah, completely, absolutely agree. Like, I know that he's one of the smaller guys on the court, but he's got a high basketball IQ, and that shows on his defense and his rotations. And, I think his like strength and his compact size, especially in his legs, like, is a little bit underrated. Like, he's able to compete defensively despite like his height, I think because of his build and his IQ. So yeah, he has been a difference maker. You could argue now, and I think you would win this argument, that he was the biggest impact trade deadline move that was made this year, because here he is affecting games in the Western Conference Finals. And are the Thunder up 3-2 right now without Jared McCain? I don't think so. I don't think they are. I think they lose one of these games without Jared McCain. Just a threat of him out there, the spacing, the shooting, all those things. I think he has made a real impact in the series. And to get him by giving up what ended up being the number 22 pick in the 2026 draft and a few seconds is an absolute steal.
Yeah, I think everybody is very happy about what the Thunder got in that trade. Totally worth it. And I think it's not a hot take at all to say that the Thunder would not be up 3-2 without Jared McCain. But there's some other players that are worth talking about as well. In my observation watching Shea, and this is not a knock on Shea, I think if anything, this is an example of his greatness, but that might have been the worst 32-point performance I've seen from Shea, because he shot poorly, 7 of 19 from the field, most of his points, or a lot of his points, did come from the free throw line. He had 16 free throws made, did have 9 assists, but he had 6 turnovers. And I think he was kind of struggling at breaking down the Spurs defense at time. And really the difference in this one was not Shea being great. It was a total team effort. It was Shea being his usual dominant self offensively, creating that gravity, getting to the free throw line. But you had Chet Holmgren, who got off to a very quick start offensively, was hunting for his shot, finished with 16 points. Isaiah Hartenstein was a plus 24 in this game. He was 6 of 8 from the field and scored 12 points. I already talked about Jared McCain. Alex Caruso was unbelievable last night with 22 points, including 4 of 8 from 3 and 6 assists himself. Kenrich Williams got, real live burn in this one, like a little bit in game 3. He was fearless in shooting, 2 of 2 from 3, 8 points in 12 minutes. Cason Wallace made a big impact, was a plus 29 in in 31 minutes. So it took everybody for the Thunder to pull this one out. Outside of Jared McCain, Brandon, who stood out to you?
Yeah, you're right. Shea himself said in the postgame last night that if there were 4 or 5 me's in that first quarter, we would have been down by like 20 points. So he praised like his teammates. Most of his media availability postgame was praising his teammates. I agree. It was a total team effort. I would say Isaiah Hartenstein, though. First of all, what he did defensively on Wemby was unbelievable. Like, it's so funny looking back on game 1, how the narrative was Isaiah Hartenstein cannot play in this series against Wemby. And now, after 5 games, the question is like, is Isaiah Hartenstein like the best Wemby stopper in the NBA? Like, he held Wemby to 20 points on 4 of 15 shooting, 0 of 5 from 3, only 6 rebounds. He went 12 of 12 from the free throw line, although you won't hear about that. In 38 minutes, he was a -8. If you can win the Wemby minutes, that's a huge, huge swing in your favor, and Isaiah Hartenstein was a big, big reason why. Hart was a plus 24 in 31 minutes. He had 12 points on 6 of 8 shooting. He had 15 rebounds, 4 assists, and 1 block. So, obviously you could pinpoint Alex Caruso, Jared McCain, we talked about. I thought Cason had a great game. Shout out to Kenny Hustle for his game. Chet, I thought, had a great game. But to me, I would have to give it to Isaiah Hartenstein.
I won't argue with you on that one. His defense really has been incredibly impressive. And I think the way that he made Wemby, especially in that second half when Wemby was like, I think I've got to be more aggressive if we're going to come back. And Hart wasn't giving him any daylight. Wemby had to work for every shot that he took, and I think it wore him out. I mean, you saw that lob that Wemby is usually getting 8 feet above the rim to put down, and he didn't even make it above the rim.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. Like his defense. Like, here's the deal. My main thing with Hart's defense on Wemby, and just the Thunder's defense in general on Wemby, and I think Hart is the biggest reason because he's so big and he's so physical. Wemby just does not want to fight in the post at the rim to deal with that physicality. And, in game 1, when Wemby went off for 41 points, if you looked at his shot chart, besides that 35-foot three-pointer in the first overtime that basically won the game, all his buckets were at the rim, either dunks, lobs, putbacks, whatever. And that's when the Thunder were putting wings on him because that was, based on, the regular season, it seemed like that was the way to go. Well, since then, the Thunder have put Hart on him, and Hart has used his physicality and size, and it's driven Wemby away from the rim. And that's why his lobs are limited. That's why his scoring at the rim is limited. He has to put in so much effort, both offensively and defensively, especially defensively. And, he was only playing like 30 minutes a night in the regular season and missed a lot of games. Now all of a sudden he has to play 40 minutes a night. So he's gassed. He's having to deal with the physicality and brute force of Hart and his strength. And I think that has been a real key to slowing down Wemby, was putting Hartenstein on him. He's hanging out at the perimeter, which is exactly what the Thunder want.
Yeah, and I think that that is the challenge for Wemby is he's not a back to the basket type big, right? He is going to get his points in the paint, typically off of putbacks or lobs. And our Hart is doing a really good job of keeping him out of that space, keeping him outside of the paint, limiting his opportunities to get some of those easy second chance buckets, which, Victor's been known to vacuum up. And then Hart's size it's just difficult for Wemby to sort of create his own shot. So he was resorting to, I think, more mid-range and 3-point shots in this one. He was 0 of 5 from 3. And as a team, the Spurs really struggled from shooting. Now, from an optimistic side, if I'm going to be a Spurs fan here, I'm going to say, well, Wemby had a bad game. Fox had a bad game. Vassell had a bad, the shooting was terrible for the Spurs. 40%, 29% from 3. They were getting good looks from 3. They just weren't converting. And if the Spurs could make a few shots from deep, because the Thunder are collapsing on Wemby, this one is a different game. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I think that, what we saw in game 4, that was obviously not the Thunder's best shot, and everything went right for the Spurs. And what we saw in game 5, the Thunder shot incredibly well, and the Spurs did not shoot well at all. And so, going back to game 6, do I think there'll be a repeat of games 4 or 5? I don't think so. What I expect in game 6 is a very close, very tight, competitive game. The Thunder are going to want to close this out and not have to deal with a game 7. The Spurs are going to be desperate. They're going to be at home. And I agree. It's more than likely the Spurs shoot better at home than they did in game 5. And it's more than likely the Thunder don't shoot the percentages that they did from the 3-point line in game 5 on the road. That said, I think it's a true toss-up, like game 6. And if I'm a Spurs fan, obviously you're down 3-2. It doesn't look great, especially having to play a game 7 in Oklahoma City. But I do wonder, even if the Spurs play better and they're at home, is this series catching up? A lot of those Spurs players look gassed. They don't have the depth. Those guys are playing heavy minutes. This has been a very physical series. And now this is their first closeout game. They could truly go home. So their season is on the line. The Thunder have the championship experience. That said, the Spurs have bucked every sort of, timeline expectation, all the experience and all those things are here, 2 wins away from the NBA Finals. So they're not exactly like most historical teams when it comes to the whole inexperience thing and all that. So game 6 is going to be fascinating.
Well, we'll do a little bit more analysis on game 6 and maybe we'll get some predictions in there from you. But yeah, I do think you've identified the right questions. How will the Spurs respond to this loss? How will they respond with their backs against the wall for the first time, really, in this entire playoffs with this really young team for the first time in this position? But I want to go back to the other narrative that is making its way through the interwebs on this one, and that's the Thunder are allowed to foul and the Spurs are not, and the foul calls are going in the Thunder's favor. There's a clip going around. I think it was the same guy. I can't remember who did a clip of all the quote calls that went for the Thunder, the 50-50 calls that went for the Thunder. There's another one of those videos going around. I think it's got 4 clips that just go on repeat. So it's a 2-minute video. But Castle himself said after the game, he said, "I'm trying to play through it. It's tough. The way they guard, how physical they are. We don't get that same luxury to play as physical on the other end." Counterpoint to that.
Counterpoint to that is I have eyes and I've been watching this entire series, every single play, and it's just not true. That whole LeBron James meme of him talking to Şengün and said anybody but you can't say that. I can't take credit for this because I think it was Thunder Film Room on Twitter who posted that, but that's exactly the right response in my head, because Stephon Castle of all people cannot say this. The way that he's been defending Shea this entire series, just grabbing, holding, hugging, pulling, pushing on Shea the entire series, and to say that is just so funny. By the way, the Spurs have a +11 free throw disparity in this series. In their 2 wins, they had double-digit free throw advantages, plus 10 and plus 14. And in the Thunder wins, they had a plus 7, an even free throw disparity, and a plus 6 free throw disparity. And so it's just not true. If you watch these two teams, both are playing incredibly physically. Both teams are. Like, this is playoff basketball, and this is what everybody supposedly wants. But then, if the Thunder are winning, that's not what everybody wants, apparently. I truly think that the masses will not be satisfied until there is 0 free throws for the Thunder, and then the other team gets a trip to the free throw line every possession. That's just the way it feels like if you follow this discourse. I will say this, one last thing I want to say about that. In the Thunder losses, where again, they were at double-digit free throw disadvantages, they credited the Spurs for their physicality and for playing harder and for being better in those games and saying that they had to play better. And in the Spurs losses, it seems like refs and free throws has been a continuous theme.
Yes, that's all people want to talk about. And I think you're exactly right that, let's say there's a game where the Spurs took 40 free throws and the Thunder took 2 free throws on a shooting foul that Shea drew. That's what's going to get clipped. Well, the one foul that Shea drew, they're going to say, oh, he was flopping, and that's all anybody will talk about, despite a 38 free throw disparity. I guarantee that's what would happen. And I mean, I think it is so funny to me that the casuals who don't really watch the NBA, who don't understand the game, that's what they've latched onto, and that's what drives clicks on social media, is this flopper narrative by the Thunder, when if you just watch the other team, they're doing the exact same things, right? There is a goal to draw fouls because those are free points, right? Especially if teams are shooting 85, 87% from the free throw line, you want to get to the free throw line. You can't blame either team from trying to draw fouls and create points that way.
Yeah, first of all these fouls on the not all. It's never going to be all. Most of these fouls are fouls both ways, by the way. Like, when the Spurs are getting trips to the free throw line, it's typically a foul on the Thunder. And when the Thunder are going to the free throw line, it's typically a foul on the Spurs. These are real fouls for the most part. Of course, NBA refs are going to get some calls wrong. I mean, that's just it's human nature. You can't be perfect. But unfortunately, if you pay any attention to NBA discourse online, or unfortunately now it's bled over to national broadcasts, these things only go one way. Like you said, it's 1 or 2 clips that are slow-mo, that go viral, and it looks like the entire NBA is rigging everything for the Thunder. Like, if you only watch basketball through social media, which unfortunately I think some people do, you would think that the NBA is rigging everything for the Thunder because that's the only thing that gets out there. You could very easily do the same thing for the Spurs, like take foul calls that the Spurs get and put them in slow-mo and put them out there. But those aren't going to get the engagement. Those aren't going to get the clicks. Those aren't going to get the views. It's the Thunder ones that do. And it's very, very unfortunate, and it's disingenuous, and just feels like a whole bunch of broken. It's like gaslighting to say that the Thunder are the only ones that get the calls and the Spurs are ethical hoopers and Thunder are floppers. Just watch the games.
Yeah, and we'll get to the ethical nature of the Spurs in a little bit more detail in a second. But the one other button I want to put on this is I'll vacillate between feeling very annoyed that the casual narrative and the general narrative on social media is anti-Oklahoma City. Like, I want people to respect my team and enjoy it the same way that I do. On the other hand, I mean, the views on this series have been really, really good. I think, Game 3 or something was one of the most watched Western Conference Finals. And so people are watching. For all the discussion about how Oklahoma City is unwatchable, they sure do have a lot of people watch them on national broadcast and in the playoffs. So I am almost inclined to stop being frustrated about the narrative and just embrace being the villain. And as long as it's effective, as long as we're winning, we're drawing the attention, I don't really care how we get there to a championship. We'll be villains the entire way, and I'll live with it.
I would say this. I would say enjoy the winning regardless. Like, it is hard to ignore all the narratives and discourse that's out there, and it's so bad. But to truly enjoy what the Thunder are doing, and what they're doing is very special, you just got to ignore that noise. I don't know that the Thunder themselves want to lean into the whole villain role, because they're really not villains. Like, it's so funny. This team is made up of a lot of like second rounders, undrafted players who like worked to get where they are. They built from the ground up. It was a quick rebuild. They try to do things the right way. They only bring in high character people. They take accountability. They don't whine, about calls, all those things, like all the things that you supposedly want in a leader you have in Shea, and that you want in a team and teammates you have with this Thunder team. The vibes are all good. They're all good dudes. So I don't think the Thunder want to lean into any sort of villain role, because they don't view themselves as villains. I think they're just viewed as villains because they're beating everybody. So 29 other fan bases are tired of getting beaten the last couple of years, and they want to see somebody take them down. So for some reason, the good guys are the team that drafted a number 1 overall pick who's a generational prospect, then a number 4 pick, then a number 2 pick, and back-to-back-to-back seasons, and are built up for also a potential dynasty. And if they were to win this series and win a championship this year, like, where does everybody think Wemby and the Spurs are going? They're not going anywhere either. So it's just kind of funny. Everybody wants to see, the Thunder painted as villains and go down and cheer the Spurs. I'm like, do you realize the monster they're creating in San Antonio with that team as well? These are the two teams that should dominate the NBA for the next 5 years. But yeah, for some reason, the Thunder are the villains.
Well, maybe that narrative will turn, especially as I think the Wemby's position that the Spurs play ethical hoops, I think, is going to come more under fire as you watch them play. The clip of Castle shoving J-Dub in the back, that was the play where J-Dub aggravated that hamstring injury, made its way around the internet before Game 5. And then what happened to McCain in the waning minutes of Game 5 with that really vicious elbow that he got from Mason Plumlee, and you have that really hard foul by Biyombo on McCain as well. It's after Wemby had whispered something to them. I doubt that's really what happened, but I mean, certainly it looked a little bit suspect there. And then you have Wemby not even showing up for his post-game media availability. Hey, I'm not seeing the ethical nature of the Spurs hoops.
Yeah, it's, again, if you wanted to put some viral clips out there of, you could do like a highlight reel of like Wemby, elbowing Naz Reid in the throat and diving at SGA's knees and like bull rushing J Will or it was Caruso, bumping in to Chet, skipping the media obligations post game. I don't know how you get a highlight reel of that one, but there's plenty out there. All I will say is this: if that was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander who is doing those things, like, what would the discourse be? If it was Shai skipping media obligations after a Game 4 loss, what would the discourse be? If it was a Thunder player elbowing, a Spurs player in the back in garbage time, and by the way, the player doing the elbowing is 7 feet, and the player getting the elbow is the smallest guy on the court, like, what would the discourse be? But again, unfortunately, that's just the nature of NBA discourse right now. It's going to all be painted a certain way and ignored the other way.
Well, let's look ahead to Game 6. This one will be in San Antonio. Certainly wondering whether those nuns will be sitting courtside again. If they are, I'm going to be a little bit more concerned. You said it was a 50-50 game. leading up into game 6, and probably is going to be over which role players shoot better between the two teams. Any more to add on your thoughts on who could have the edge in game 6 and what it might come down to?
Yeah, I mean, I do think I don't want to just put this all on shot variance, but I do think a big part of this is how do the role players, shoot in game 6? Also, like, what kind of SGA game are we gonna get? You feel like he's due for just like this typical Shea game. Now, I think some of that is it's hard to do that when you got Stephon Castle defending him the way he's defending him, very physically with a lot of contact, and then Wemby, at the rim and shading players and double teams to him once he crosses the 3-point line, or in most games as soon as he crossed the half court line. But you do wonder if there's a big SGA game here that's coming in game 6 or if needed game 7. So that's what I'm watching for. Like, if Shea can outplay Wemby in game 6, and if the role players, can hit from 3, I think the Thunder have a really good chance of winning this game. And if Isaiah Hartenstein is allowed to play physically against Wemby, you hate to always go back to, how the game is going to be called and whistles and refs and things like that. But I do think, like, if physicality is permitted, hopefully it's permitted on both sides. If Castle is allowed to defend Shea physically, hopefully Hartenstein is allowed to defend Wemby physically. Or if they call a bunch of fouls on Castle, then also call them on Hartenstein. Just an even neutral whistle is what you hope to see if you're a fan of either of these teams, I think. But yeah, I think this one is a true coin flip. I think the Thunder are the better team, but they are without J-Dub and AJ Mitchell, and it is on the road, and the Spurs are going to be desperate. But the Thunder have the championship experience, and I do think that they've got the momentum right now, and the Spurs' backs are up against the wall, and that could go either way.
Well, you said the Thunder are without J-Dub and AJ Mitchell. I think with the calf strain, it is highly unlikely that we see AJ Mitchell again this season. Again, I'm going to play doctor here. I don't really know, but that's just, I think, the expectation, especially with the risks to, like, other tears in the lower body that we've seen other players who have some of this calf strain, including like Halliburton in last year's NBA Finals. So the cautious thing to do with AJ is to make sure he's fully healthy before he returns. Now, it looks like J-Dub is closer. I mean, he's moving around pregame. He's participating in practices. So let's say you get to make the call. J-Dub is 80% for game 6. So he could go if the team needed him to go. But there is that risk that he aggravates that hamstring injury. Do you play him in game 6?
So I agree with you on AJ Mitchell. I would say it's highly, highly unlikely that he plays again this series with that calf strain. The Thunder going to be incredibly cautious and conservative with that injury. J-Dub, it just seems like the wording on everything feels like he's close, like he's taken part in all these pregame warmups. He's listed as day-to-day. He's listed as questionable for every game. Now, do you risk him in a game 6 when you know that if you lose, you have a game 7 at home and you could play him there? Or, is it a deal where if he's cleared and he can play? I'm not sure. I think the Thunder would like to buy as much time as they possibly can for J-Dub. Again, they want to be conservative and cautious and take the long-term picture into account. That said, though, he seems to be close. And if you were to add J-Dub to the lineup in game 6, it feels like, hey, maybe this can really help us close the deal, close things out, throws a wrench into what the Spurs have planned, and then you don't even have to mess with or worry about a game 7. I don't know. I think it's like 45-55 that he plays. And again, those are pretty decent odds. It feels like he's close.
Well, and I'm sure we're not going to get the answer to whether J-Dub plays until just before the tip-off, because I do think it's a strategic advantage for the Thunder to leave the Spurs in the dark whether Dub is going to play or not. And that may have been the strategy in these other 2 games where they didn't expect him to play, but they had him out there doing some warm-ups just to make the Spurs wonder if their game plan was going to have to be thrown out the window. They'd have to make adjustments for Dub. But let's get predictions, and let's do predictions for both game 6 and a potential game 7. What do you think is going to happen in game 6 if you had to make a pick?
This is hard, John. Like, on one end, I don't want to be a jinx or anything like that if I call a certain way.
Do you think you
So
have that power, Brandon?
no, I don't. But everybody feels like they have that power. If it
Yeah,
goes
yeah.
wrong, then they always blame themselves, like, "Ah, it was me." Um, I said the Thunder were going to win in 7 before the series started. That was my official projection, was Thunder in 7. And here we are. It seems like this is set up to go that way. So I mean, I can't go back on that now. So I will, I suppose, stick with my prediction of Thunder in 7.
And that's fair. And if the Thunder lose game 6 and there is a game 7, I'm not going to blame you because you made this prediction. And I'll give you some cover here because I'm going to predict the same. I thought it was going to be a 7-game series coming into this one. For there to be a 7-game series, the Thunder are going to have to lose 3. So that means they've got to lose another one. And it sets up a pretty monumental game 7 that I'm sure will set records for viewership. And the Spurs have played well at home, if we look at game 4. And so I guess the expectation is they will respond. But there is always that chance. I think you've talked about their immaturity. They're still kind of young players. We'll see what happens when their backs against the wall. Will they be playing free, or will they play a little bit tighter? And are they gassed? Do they have the wheels to keep up with the Thunder and its depth in a game 6? And does Dub play? There's a lot of factors that could go into swinging game 6, but we'll say in the chance that the Thunder don't close it out in game 6, which we all hope they do close it out in game 6, and there is a game 7. Are you betting the farm on the Thunder?
I don't have a farm to bet, but if I did, I think the Thunder are winning in 7 or 6. It could be 6, but I do think that I trust Mark Daignault and I trust this team after losses, and the Thunder are either going to win in 6 or they have a chance to course correct after a loss and play a game 7 at home in front of the best crowd in the NBA, and a game 7 environment would be absolutely electric. And this team has championship experience, and they're going up against a young team. And I think we saw some of that inexperience in game 5, by the way. Like, for all the talk of game 5, one thing that we haven't mentioned yet was like the inexperience I did think came into a play for the Spurs. Like they made some really, really, I don't want to say dumb, immature. I don't know. There were some mistakes made that I don't think a seasoned team would have made, like some fouls and some shot selection and things like that. So I do think that a game 7 in Oklahoma City with the crowd, with a possible course correction from Mark as far as adjustments go, against this inexperienced team, I would expect the Thunder to pull it out.
And if it does go to a game 7, and this may just be my optimism speaking, I would expect J-Dub to play in game 7. I don't expect him to play in game 6, but I think he shows up for game 7.
Right, exactly. I would too. If it's a closeout game at home with him being day-to-day and questionable every single game and seemingly being close, it does feel like they might pull that lever if he's available to go for a game 7. I agree.
Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. Let's hope that he has a little bit of extra time to rest after the Thunder close out game 6 without him, and the Thunder get themselves healthy to face a red hot Knicks team in the NBA Finals. But hey, vibes are good today coming off that game 5 win in dominant fashion, especially after the depths that Thunder Nation was in after game 4. Any last comments?
Great game. Enjoy this, Thunder fans. Don't pay attention to the discourse, the refs talk, the whistles, the flopping, all that stuff. These two teams are the best 2 teams in the NBA, I believe. And the Thunder, without J-Dub and without A.J. Mitchell, straight up outplayed the Spurs in game 5. Like, that's the bottom line. And Thunder fans should absolutely be enjoying this moment and just like shut out any sort of outside noise that's not saying anything other than the Thunder outplayed the Spurs.
Well, that is a great place to end it. And that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning in to the Daily Thunder podcast. I'm John Napier, host of the podcast, and he's Brandon Rahbar, Daily Thunder beat writer. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe to the Daily Thunder podcast on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you like what you hear, do us a favor and leave us a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll be back in your feed soon.